Welcome back to Ray's Garage. I'm Ray Cornelia, and this is part 10 of the Harbor Freight Glass Cabinet series. If you recall, back in part 9, we mounted the flow meter, we did a vacuum hose modification, we showed 2 vacuum options, and we did a little flow meter adjustments with the wastegates. So in this episode, we're going to talk a lot more detail of the flow meter, show another modification, show a couple other modifications, and answer a few questions I got. One of the questions asked was, can I install the glove rings in reverse, putting the collar on the outside for easy glove change outs? Answer to the question is yes, you can. However, it will significantly reduce the length of the gauntlet of your glove, so it'll restrict some of the reach distance inside the cabinet. Yes, it'll make for easier glove change out, but if you have the quick change window kit, that makes glove change out a lot easier as well. Also aesthetically, you're going to have the collar sticking out with a clamp on it. It won't have that clean look, and it may reduce the distance that you could stand in front of your cabinet as well. Another frequently asked question is, what color paint did I use to paint the light bar, the cuff kit, the door skirt kit? The answer to that is I used Rust-Oleum Gloss Cherry. I'll post the part number in the description. I also want to mention that I used this over a white primer. Now I gotta tell you, it doesn't match exactly. I'm not sure if you could see the color difference between the Harbor Freight cabinet and the red on the light bar, but the Harbor Freight cabinet has a little orange tint to the color. So it doesn't match exactly, it does match pretty close. Let me try to give you a shot of the inside. Here's a shot of the door skirt kit and the inside of the cabinet with the cuff kit. Looks like the halogen lights are blowing out the shot a little bit. I wanted to mention, if anyone did find an exact match, please put it in the comments below. If you recall in a previous video, I made this thumb screw adjustment tool, and this is for the 1032 set screw on the inside of the flow meter for fine adjustments. When I showed Mike Tacoma this, he immediately realized he needed to upgrade the flow meter. I'll talk more about the flow meter later in the video, but there is now a Gen 3 version of this flow meter. Mike made this in place of the 1032 set screw. So all you have to do is basically remove the set screw, screw this guy in, and you're good to go. Let's go ahead and do that. Here's what we had before. Then again, the new part threads right into the place where the set screw came out. There it is. If you recall, back in part 2, we removed the rubber grommet from the rear panel to install the wastegate. Another modification to the fresh air intake is to take that grommet and cut it down to fit here. A few reasons why we're going to use the rear panel grommet, modify it to fit the fresh air intake port, is one, it reduces the inside diameter of this port to equal the inside diameter of the vacuum port. Now, you're asking, well, this is not the vacuum port anymore, it's the fresh air intake. Correct. With these both being the same diameter, we're using this as a control point, which makes it easier to balance the system out and make adjustments to the flow meter and the wastegates for optimal negative cabinet pressure. The grommet also covers up the mounting holes for this flange that Harbor Freight provided for the vacuum connection. So to do this, it's pretty simple. Take your grommet off the back panel, make one cut, install the grommet to where it overlaps, and then cut it till these angles match up nice and tight. So just take your time doing this and you'll end up with a nice smooth seam right here. The testing we performed, we're able to get optimal negative cabinet pressure using 3 different vacuums, and I'll demonstrate that here a little later in the video. Another question was what I used to close off the open holes that were left in the cabinet. This was from the factory original light switch box. On the back is from the light mounting bracket. I just used some leftover hardware. If you don't have leftover hardware, just use some like 1032 or smaller screws to fill in these holes. This plug is a Tacoma Company provided product. There's one here. Here's the other one. This is just simply siliconed in. This is where the Harbor Freight LED light bar used to be. Those holes are now blocked by some hardware. I mentioned this in a previous video, but you're going to want to take a flashlight and shut off the lights and try to find any gaps. You'll see light escape between the panels. If you have any light escaping, that's a good time to close up these gaps. Let's talk a little bit about the new Gen 3 flow meter. The reason Mike and I spent a lot of time perfecting flow meter is because we wanted to use this flow meter with any vacuum or any dust collection type system. So we had to make some very small changes to it. For those of you that already have the flow meter, Mike can supply 3 other parts. Let me talk about some of the changes so you can see what we changed. For one, we changed the weight of the metering ball. We changed the diameter of this port right here. We added the finger adjustment screw, which is a very nice upgrade. And if you notice, I have this flow meter mounted in front of the light bar, where when you saw in the mounting video, I mounted it up against this. Well, that was a big mistake on my part. I shouldn't have done that because I had to remove it every time I needed to make an adjustment on the back side here. So what I end up doing is I end up plugging the 3/8 hole button cap screw and moving it down here and mounting it with the 3 mounting screws. And let me show you one other modification we made. If you remember, when I installed the flow meter, I also installed this neoprene hose which ran back into this corner. And this was the vacuum intake hose. Well, the final modification we made, which gave us a lot more adjustability, is removing the hose and adding a brass thin wall sleeve. Let me bring you in on it. This is now the intake port for the flow meter. It simply presses into the flow meter and comes straight through the cabinet and stubs out right here. Here's another angle shot of the newly mounted Gen 3 flow meter. I can easily get to the adjustment now for fine tuning. And like I said, all these changes were made to accommodate any dust collection system in any power range. Here you see the 3 vacuums we did all of our testing with. This is a 3.5 horsepower, 6 gallon. This is a 5 horsepower, 12 gallon. And this is a 6 horsepower, 14 gallon. Now the reason we chose these vacuums is for several reasons. One, they all have the 2.5 inch port for the 2.5 inch hose. And I like to remind you, we did the modification to the 2.5 foot hose, shortening it. That way giving us a little more performance out of the hose. Instead of having a 7 foot hose now, we have like a 4 foot hose. Another reason for these 3 vacuums is that they all have the same size large filter. All 3 vacuums share the same size large filter, which you see here. You also see I run bags in my vacuums. You can run bags, or you don't have to really run bags if you don't want to. I have to mention though, since these 2 are brand new, these filters haven't been tempered yet. And what that means is once they start getting packed in the pleats, that's where the flow meter really comes in handy. So you can see your negative cabinet pressure dropping, and that's a sure sign that you need to clean your filter. We found in our testing that you do not need the vacuum wastegate for this small vacuum, but you do need it for anything larger than this. This gives you a wastegate adjustment at the vacuum and at the rear of the cabinet. For our first demonstration, we have the small vacuum. I have this camera pointing at the vacuum and the cabinet wastegate. Remember I said we don't use the vacuum wastegate on the small vac? I have the other camera aimed towards the flow meter. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to fire up the cabinet, which is going to turn the vacuum on. For the first demonstration, I'm going to show you where the flow meter is with this wastegate fully open. And then I'm going to hit the pedal. The cabinet's set for 40 PSI, and you're going to see what introducing compressed air into the cabinet does on the flow meter. So let's do that test first. Pressing the pedal now. Okay, we just created a benchmark. You saw that the ball is right between the red BB and the first green one. That's a good spot for very light media. So now what I'm going to do is demonstrate as we close the wastegate how the flow meter comes up. You want higher vacuum for heavier media. You want lower vacuum for lighter media and soda, walnut shells, blast material of that sort. Okay, so test number 2 with the small vac. I'm going to demonstrate what happens as we close the cabinet wastegate. Halfway closed. Pressing the pedal now. So as you saw in that test, we closed the wastegate slowly. You saw the flow meter coming up. When I had it fully closed, you see that it was slightly above the center BB. That's the highest negative vacuum pressure we could get in the cabinet with a small vacuum. Then you saw me hit the pedal, introducing 40 PSI to the cabinet, and you saw the ball drop. Okay, let's move to our medium-sized vacuum. For our next demonstration, we have a medium-sized vacuum. We have the vacuum wastegate fully open, and we have the rear panel wastegate fully open. I'm going to do the same test again. I'm going to fire it up, walk over, hit the pedal, introduce the 40 PSI to the cabinet, and you'll monitor the flow meter as we do that. And then we'll come back over and start adjusting the wastegates for optimal negative cabinet pressure. Hitting the pedal now. Okay, you saw how introducing the compressed air to the cabinet dropped the negative vacuum pressure in the cabinet. So now we're going to adjust the wastegates. Right now they're both wide open. About half. This is for a little medium weight media. Okay, with this ball all the way up, I could bring it almost to the red. That's basically too much vacuum. That would suck your media clear out of the cabinet. Right now I have this set halfway closed, or halfway open, however you look at it, and this one is about halfway. That gave us almost top negative vacuum inside the cabinet. So again, for your lighter medias, you want it down near the bottom. For your heavier media, in the middle to top range. Okay, so you saw that demonstration. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it to the top of the range and hit the pedal again and show you what that does by introducing pressure at the top range. Hitting the pedal now. Okay, there you have it. You notice that it doesn't affect it as much when the vacuum is at the top of the range. So let's bring the big vac in and show you the difference there. Okay, we have a 6-horse 14 gallon now, both wastegates wide open. We're going to fire it up and then introduce compressed air. Hitting the pedal now. You notice the slight variations between vacuums. Of course, the larger one is going to create a lot more vacuum, which needs more regulation. So now we're going to adjust wastegates and bring the negative cabinet pressure up. That's about halfway, which puts our meter in the middle on the vacuum wastegate. Now we're cabinet wastegate. Vacuum wastegate is halfway shut. The top one is about a quarter open, and you can see this vacuum easily reaches maximum negative vacuum pressure inside the cabinet. So now let's introduce some compressed air with it up at the third marker. Pressing the pedal now. Opening up both wastegates. Now you noticed I did not adjust the flow meter for either three of these vacuums. I did that on purpose just as a benchmark. This is for fine tuning, bringing your ball down to its lowest point and or its highest point, depending on your dust collection system. Another thing I'd like to mention, as these filters become tempered, you're going to see your ball starting to drop. You never want to get into positive cabinet pressure, because that's where you're going to start blowing media out of any open seams you have, and it's going to not remove the dust adequately. So this was a successful test. I hope you followed along okay. I did the best I could with 2 cameras. Please feel free to ask any questions on the adjustments, on the wastegates. This will conclude part 10. In closing, I'd like to say thank you, and if you have any questions about any of this build series, please feel free to call Mike or hit me up in the comments. In part 11, we're actually going to blast something, guys. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm sure you're going to be impressed as much as I will be with how this cabinet performs. I have to mention I have something very special coming up real soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, see ya.